And again, people might think, oh, you know, a little spring like that, it can't possibly affect things because they have never tried it. And I'd honestly think these designers, if they had actually listened to the with and without, they would never have put them in. So when it comes to the speed of notes starting and stopping, it does matter. And any form of damping, it kind of loses speed. The reason that I think this works is, one, it's very linear in comparison to the others, and secondly is that it's a very low friction.
This is one of the criticisms that we get, is this looks cheap, this looks fiddly, and yet it does seem to be the best solution. Last time we spoke, we were talking about the forces that create skating force, an inward drag towards the center of your record. Today, we're going to be talking about something that not many people talk about, which is the design behind anti-skate mechanisms. We can think of 6 different anti-skate mechanism designs. They all look different. They do not sound the same. The most sophisticated looking designs with precision dials that dial down to a fraction of a gram might actually sound the worst, whereas the humble bent wire with a weight on a piece of the end of a fishing line might actually be the best. Let's go into why. Hi, I'm David Baker of Origin Live. This is my dad and our company founder, Mark. So skating forces, as we understand them, are about 10% of tracking force, and they vary a little bit throughout the record. They are highest at the outer groove. They're at their lowest towards the middle and 2/3 of the record, and then they increase slightly as you get to the inner grooves. Now, you've written an article all about this. What does a good anti-skate mechanism need to do in order to cope with skating forces?
Okay, well, I think you've already outlined one of the biggest problems, and that is you have got variation of the amount of anti-skate you want to apply all the way across the record. So we just aim to give an even force all the way across, because you can't, it's a compromise whatever you do.
Yeah.
So the key thing is to get that evenness right the way across. And I'd move on to saying that the other thing an anti-skate must do is interfere to the minimum possible degree. And this is where I think a lot of designs seriously underestimate the impact that side bias has. And
so just to clarify there, are you saying interfere as little with the freedom of movement of the arm?
Both friction, obviously, friction's one.
In the bearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's going to, all side bias add friction to the freedom of movement. But what they also do is they introduce vibration to the tone arm itself. So there's problems, you know, there are various problems to overcome. And there are 5, as you said, there's 5 or 6 different approaches. And so let's start diving into the different ways that people look at this problem, shall we?
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Shall I rank them in order of awfulness?
You could do. Maybe we should do that at the end. Maybe if we go through them.
No, I'm going to start with the worst.
Okay.
The front runner for the worst possible design.
Okay, what's that?
Okay, springs. I'm afraid that I really do not like springs. And the reasons for that are more from experience. I mean, in the early days when we were experimenting with Rega arms, I think it's worth relating a number of things because they applied so much to the designs we developed from these, because observation of what actually happens in real life is really, really helpful. So we started off modifying Regas, and what we found was that the Rega uses a dynamic force to apply its downforce. So that what you do is you perfectly balance the arm and then you apply the downforce with a spring mechanism.
And that is how you set tracking force?
That's how you set tracking force.
Okay,
but essentially it's a spring.
Yeah.
And so what I'm concentrating on here is the problems that springs introduced.
Okay.
Because a lot of people use springs to adjust the tracking force. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean sometimes throughout other design elements, you know, if you think of how they've been applied to turntables, yeah, we've tried that. Not a good place to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we found, first of all, some customers registered with us that ripping this spring out entirely and because we modified the rear stub of the Rega, so you could adjust the counterweight, what you could do before anyway. So anyway, you ripped out the spring, big improvement in sound quality, just applying downforce using the weight of the counterweight effectively, or the weight of the arm.
Yeah.
And the other trick which we noticed, and we recommended lots of tips to Rega arm owners about how to improve their sound quality, is we said take the tracking force of the spring down to 0, in other words, minimum spring tension, and adjust the tracking force using the weight.
That's static.
Yeah, that improved the sound quality as well. But either way, springs were very bad news. And I think the reason is, for a side bias mechanism, they've got 3 problems. One is that they vibrate like crazy. 2 is that they actually increase the side bias as you get towards the inner grooves of the record, because the spring is tensioning up as it goes through.
Right.
The third one is that springs do tend to age, so that the springiness in 20, 30 years' time is not the same as it is now. So that accuracy of the dial is not going to be what it was when you first bought the arm.
Interesting. And is that because the kind of the material under tension over that amount of time just degrades or cracks, or?
Yeah, it just undergoes a slow kind of fatigue and stretch.
Right. Okay. So springs, not a fan.
But what I am, the only reason I'd be a fan of springs is because they look fantastic. I mean, you can have this. I mean, the engineering on arms like the Itok look absolutely amazing. You know, that's your spring dial. It's got graduations on it, beautifully produced.
So is the Itok another dynamic arm in terms of
tracking
tracking
force?
force?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And their side bias, which is just a nice little beautiful dial here, is that a spring tension?
That's spring as well.
That is an example of a spring tension side bias mechanism. Okay.
Yeah, but lots of arms use this because it looks so nice.
But actually something that is meant to be applying a constant force is constantly vibrating because of the springiness. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And to get over that, the more linear the spring is, the longer it's got to be, basically. And that gives you big trouble in terms of vibration. And again, people might think, oh, you know, a little spring like that, it can't possibly affect things, because they have never tried it. And I'd honestly think these designers, if they had actually listened to the with and without, they would never have put them in. But it's just something that you discount because, oh, you know, it's tiny. But this is the problem, is that the conception of amplifying that vibration up 8,000 times, the mind cannot get its head around how big a number that is. You know, it's the difference between would you walk a mile or 8,000 miles. You know, it's a big difference.
So, okay, springs. Next least favorite?
Well, probably the lever mechanism.
Okay, really? Okay.
Yeah, this is an adaptation of the falling weight principle, and it relies on a weight rotating about an axle, okay? And attached to that fulcrum there, or bush, is another lever which contacts what I described as side bias rod.
Which is coming out of the yoke.
Which is coming out of the moving portion of the yoke. And those two contact each other. And this is quite a nice mechanism as far as introducing a constant force on the arm, because you can gear it so that it reduces force gradually as it gets towards the inner grooves. But then, as you know, as we said right at the start of the video, there's not a lot of point in reducing force. But it is a fairly constant force. And the problem that I would have with this is that it's introducing a lot of vibration in direct contact with the yoke. Because unlike a very thin thread, with the level with a very low level of friction. This has quite a high level of friction
because it's a bushing
because you have to have
around an axle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you got vibration from the base feeding into that axle, which then feeds into the rod and so on.
And this makes me think of our whole conversation around bearings, and when we were discussing the problem of stiction and friction with bearings, and how every time that tries to move, there's going to be stiction and there's going to be resistance to movement. And then the other thing that kind of it immediately worries me about that design is just the interaction between those two rods.
Yeah. Now there is a variant of this design which is quite clever, and that is that you attach, instead of having a rod resting against a rod, which is obviously a bad idea really, you have a thread between the side bias rod and the actual falling lever mechanism. And that is quite a clever idea because it's very compact.
Yeah, Kuzma do this. And I think you can also arrange the thread so that it runs more smoothly over a pulley.
Yeah.
Which is
good.
Should be less friction.
Yeah, and I'd say that is a very sound design.
Yeah.
So next up,
least favourite.
We're
on. I think.
I mean, we've actually jumped.
Fourth place.
No, that has jumped the queue. The falling lever with thread, I would put right up there, equal with just falling weight and thread.
Okay.
It's a very neat design because it compacts things.
Okay, so I mean, that is essentially the Kuzma design is essentially a falling weight, but with a few caveats.
There's lots of other designs that have done this in the past. Many other designs. Mission used to do it.
Okay, so we've done 6th place, 5th place, up for 4th place. What is your next least favourite? Okay,
well, probably magnets. So if we look at the Rega arms use a magnetic. I'll go to the sliding lever one. Right, this is a bit simpler. Rega have changed their magnet design slightly over the years, but it is essentially the same in terms of the way it works. And that is that you have a magnet on a slider here, which moves up. As you move it up closer, the tracking force increases from memory.
Sorry, you mean the
anti-skating
force? Yes,
the anti-skating force, increases as you move this up closer. And the way that works is you've got a couple of magnets just locked onto the axle here inside the mechanism, inside the kind of base molding here. There's a couple of magnets, and as this gets closer, it increases the side force with a magnet.
So it's not working by attraction, it's actually pushing away.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So that's, one would imagine that would be a wonderful way of doing it. All I can say is that we've had people, and we love the feedback we get from so many end users. It's absolutely fantastic. Give us ideas and let us know what's going on in the world. But we've had guys who have taken their magnet out of here and reported a very significant increase in sound quality, simply because that magnet rattles around. It's on a slider, rattles around in the mechanism. And I'd like to know the science and engineering about how much energy gets transmitted through a magnetic field, but it has to be significant.
So are you saying...
just because two magnets are apart and there's nothing in between them except air, doesn't mean that you're not getting vibration transmitted through that.
It doesn't mean it's
vibration.
A constant force.
I think the force would be fairly constant, but the vibration can go through that magnetic field.
Right.
If you think about it.
Okay.
But the other thing about magnets, and this is a minor niggle and it's not a realistic problem for me, is that magnets also degrade over time, so that their magnetism in 20 years, 30 years time won't be quite the same as it is now.
Okay.
Also, one thing I really should mention about this removal of the side bias is that what it does is it removes a sense of damping from the arm. In other words, it will sound more open, it will sound faster. And bearing in mind that the human ear can hear a millionth of a second, which I only found out a week ago, but that's a phenomenally small figure. So when it comes to the speed of notes starting and stopping, it does matter. And any form of damping, it kind of loses speed. What you lose on the other side of it, because you haven't got side bias operating, obviously, is you lose separation and focus, and the size of your sound stage goes down slightly. But it depends what you prefer, because some people would much prefer that openness and speed.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm quickly interrupting this video just to ask that if you're finding it worthwhile, please could you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and also press the bell notification. It really helps us to carry on making these videos. And yeah, what we want to do is carry on having open conversations about vinyl replay, and also giving you insights into how we've been making turntables and tone arms in-house in the UK since 1986. Well, not me personally, because I'm 31, and that's... Anyway, you get the idea. So thanks, and back to the video. Okay, so another contender, and this may be the contender for your least favorite, is we covered the ferrofluid bearing previously. On some arms you get ferrofluid troughs, so they have silicon liquid or something in them. And you have a trough around this side of the arm with a paddle that goes in, and this is meant to help the arm deal with eccentricities or warps or something like this in the record. And this is on some arms that have no other anti-skate mechanism. Now, I mean, maybe the most obvious question, does this actually even work as an anti-skate device?
Well, as an anti-skate device, I would rank that as ahead of the springs as the worst possible.
Right,
But you
okay.
sprung that on me a bit, really. Partly because I think the logic in it is that it will resist, if the arm wants to swing outwards, it'll be resisting that tendency. I mean, I suppose that's the logic, although I can't get my head around this design really, because it'll also resist inward swing. So it's just general resistance all round.
Well,
and it's not, I don't think it's applying proper side force at all.
No, I don't think it is. So from the research I was looking into, essentially the kind of paddle and ferrofluid, it can help resist sudden movement. Whether you actually want to resist sudden movement or not is debatable. I don't think that you do want to necessarily resist sudden movement.
No, you really don't. I mean, you've got to have a good, strong cantilever suspension, which will kind of withstand a lot of bending. Because the groove is going one way and the stylus has to follow it, you know. So what's going to bend? If the arm can't move, the cantilever has to swing right out.
Yeah.
And that pulls it right out of its sweet spot, which is in the motor mechanism.
And then in terms of so it can resist sudden movements, but in terms of constant applied movements, you kind of, the example given was thinking about stirring honey. If you put a lot of force into stirring the honey, you get a bit of resistance. But if you're doing it slowly, there's no resistance.
Right.
So it's not, this design isn't actually applying any kind of anti-skate at all. So for our purposes, it sinks down to sixth, I think.
And I think the reason that people would kind of think that this works is probably because on a very non-resonant arm, it probably calms it down a bit because it's damping it. But it's not the right way to go. An arm should not be designed like that in the first place.
Okay, next up, we have cable twist.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you think about this as a side bias mechanism, anti-skate mechanism? Just to be clear, for some reason, you've always talked about anti-skate as side bias. I think it can be referred to bias more generally in the industry, right?
Well, side bias is the cure for the two are synonymous, really.
Anti-skate and side bias, the same thing. We have historically called it side bias. We're trying to say anti-skate for the purposes of the audience. Okay, so...
Well, a lot of the audience still uses side bias as well. Anyway,
do you say side bias or do you say anti-skate? I'd love to know.
Do you say deck or do you say turntable?
Turntable always.
Or record player. Anyway, sorry, there's lots of different words for the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, so this would be most commonly seen on VPI tone arms.
Yeah.
Or I'd be interested to know if the Wilson Benesque is using it. I don't think they do. Anti-skate applied with, you've got your internal cable going into the arm tube from the top, and basically if you twist this wire, you can add resistance. And also the manner in which you bend that cable can help add resistance to movement. What do you think about, how would you rank this?
It's, I think the most obvious kind of instant problem is that you have to, it's very difficult to calibrate it. So you have to do a lot of listening, which is fine for some people, but it's, then you get into repeatability. And so it's quite a difficult way to actually get the arm right. And I mean, when I'm doing testing sometimes, I actually have the arm cable, when we're testing arm wires, for instance, I have the arm wire outside the tube because we have to swap it over so quickly. And so I sort of perch a little bit on here. But to get the thing to sound good, I then have to kind of manipulate the cable so that I don't get too much swing in one direction or another. And it's the repeatability is the problem. How it sounds in terms of sound quality, I would say it's probably a good way to go.
Okay, so in terms of, repeatability, setting it up, it's one of the more fiddly designs out there. In terms of resonance and kind of freedom of movement, a bit better?
Yeah.
Okay, now, finally, on to the hanging weight.
Yeah.
The falling weight, the bit of fishing line.
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody came up with this idea from a magazine because they were fed up with getting the non-linearity of so many the non-linearity of so many side bias devices. This is almost perfectly linear. You can adjust it so that it reduces side biases, that record goes to the center. This is because of the fact, I won't go into it all because it's complicated, but you can actually adjust where the side bias applies. It's not perfectly linear. You can get it to be slightly less towards the center of the record if you want, just by adjusting the angle of the wire loop. The reason that I think this works is, one, it's very linear in comparison to the others, and secondly is that it's a very low friction.
Right.
There's very little energy fed in through this ball bearing and mechanism. And the reason we know that is because if you remove it entirely, which is always the test for the side bias mechanism, is what does it sound like without anything applied? And there's it's almost negligible, the difference. It's audible, but it's a lot less than the difference between removing something like a spring.
Okay, so I don't recommend anybody does this unless you're comfortable with avoiding warranty, etc. But say we take out the magnets from an RB250 on the side bias or something. You're saying that you would notice the difference in sound quality a lot more doing that than you would by just taking off this.
Yeah.
And that is to do with the higher resonance produced by something like the magnet mechanism than with a falling weight.
That's right.
Okay. I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is, how did you find out about this method and what kind of drew you towards it?
Very good question. I think reading an article in Hi-Fi News about the person who designed this method and why they did it. And so we tried it. We just started with our modification of the Rega arm, and we put this method of side bias on it. And it seemed to work really well, so we stuck with it.
Oh, right. And you hadn't really seen the falling weight before that article?
Oh, yeah. You'd see them on the cheap arms because, like Project will use it on their ultra budget arms.
Yeah, because this is one of the criticisms that we get is, this looks cheap, this looks fiddly, and yet it does seem to be the best solution. Which is why we do it. We could do something that looks a lot more beautiful, but we think that it would add more vibration and more resistance to movement. Yeah,
I mean, I have played around with all sorts of ideas to make the ball and thread look classier. They all, you could put a little pulley on the end. Instead of having a wire loop here, you could have a little pulley so that you lower the friction. But the problem is you add vibration from the pulley itself will vibrate and it's on its bearings very slightly. So whatever you do, it's not going to be a vast improvement. And we know that from what we've said previously, that this works really, really well, because if you remove it entirely, it makes very little difference to the sound quality.
So the mechanism itself is adding the least amount of vibration.
Yeah.
And limiting freedom of movement the least as well, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have to be slightly mad in this game to try the most insane things. I mean, people can't believe that we test. I mean, when we first developed the rear stub modification for the Rega, we were checking, should we use an M3 bolt or an M4 bolt? Because they both sound different. You know, that's the kind of level that you're looking at. And people think, well, the arm plate doesn't matter what we make that out of, surely. But it does, because that plate resonates.
Yeah.
And it's at that kind of level. And unless you kind of take it seriously, you'll end up with an arm that vastly underperforms something that is taking all these things into consideration.
Yeah. Well, when we fundamentally think this thing, the cartridge, is tracking vibrations of, well, not exactly vibrations, but it's tracking something so small in terms of the groove, up to 40,000 times a second. Every vibration, the thing that's going to get in the way of that isn't necessarily electrical interference, because this is a generator, it's making brand new electricity. It's mechanical interference, and that is from every vibration that is happening in here and on the turntable. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
It all matters.
Absolutely.
It all matters. Okay, and on that note, I hope that we haven't offended too many Rega owners in this video. All side bias is essentially a compromise. We have found that this is the lowest compromise solution.
Yeah, and I would like to add that we really do rate Rega arms. They make budget arms at a phenomenal price.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Roy Gregor was very kind to me in the early days. He actually allowed, he supplied us with the arms, supplied us with the lift lower devices. So we've got a lot to thank Rega for.
Yeah, big up Rega, big up Roy. Thank you for watching. I'm sure there's going to be some comments on this one. Let us know what you think down below. Please give us a like, subscribe, and the bell notification if you can. It really helps us to keep making these videos. And in the meantime, whatever arm you have, whatever side bias mechanism you have, enjoy your music. All the best.